It all happened on my last holiday. It was a terrible experience. It was the worst holiday I have ever had. Me and my friend Renee, we decided to go to New Zealand. We were saving money for a very long time to go on this trip. It was our dream to go to the land of the Lord of the Rings. We had made reservations for flight at the end of July, and from that moment on, everything went wrong. It turned out that the flight was reserved for only one person, simply because a woman at the travel agency didn't understand us very well. I managed to reserve a flight, but a different one, so we couldn't go together. But I thought that it was not a big deal. My friend flew a few hours after me. I was going first. When I arrived at the airport, I was very happy because that meant that my holiday has just started and that nothing else could happen. And I was mistaken. When the hour of my flight was coming, I queued up to the custom clearance. My passport was right, and the next thing I had to do was to go through the metal detector. When I was passing through, it started to beep. I was so scared. I was taken aside immediately, and I felt like a thief. It was terrible. The custom officer had taken me to another room and she told me to undress. I tried to explain that I had a belly ring and maybe it was the cause of the beeping, but she didn't want to listen. I had to undress. They took my clothes somewhere else and I was standing alone in the middle of the room. I was shocked and stressed. The woman came back after about 5 minutes, which seemed to be ages for me. She gave me back my clothes, but I was not allowed to put them on. She checked me one more time with a small metal detector, which was obviously beeping in front of my belly ring. Of course, the custom officials went through all of my things, but they didn't find anything. I was late for my flight, so I had to wait for another one. My friend was supposed to meet me at the airport, and it was me who should be waiting for her. She was terrified that I was not there, but fortunately, she decided to wait. After that horrible flight, we met at the airport and we went to our hostel. It turned out that we expected something different, but it was not that bad, and we were too tired to look for something else. New Zealand is the most beautiful country I have ever seen, and we loved everything about it. The people, their customs, their food, basically everything, and the entire environment. We spent 3 weeks there. We had a really good time, but when the time ended, we had to fly back home. I was a little bit scared. This time, I decided to remove my belly ring. We came to the airport about 3 hours before the departure time. At the entrance to the airport, we saw an older woman who had a large card with the word written on it with capital letters, Poland. So I came up to her and I started to speak in Polish. She smiled and we started to chat together. When we were just about to leave, she asked me if I could take a box of chocolates with me and give it to her son in Poland. He was supposed to meet me at the airport because she would phone him. And of course I agreed. And then it started again. At the custom clearance, everything was okay. I came through the metal detector and nothing happened. My passport was alright. I was almost free when the custom officer asked me about the chocolates. I said that it was given to me by the lady at the entrance and that her son is going to take it back at the airport in Poland. The custom officer asked me to open the box. I didn't want to agree as it was not mine, but I had to. It turned out that inside there were not chocolates, but cocaine worth $20,000. I was taken to jail. I spent 2 days there and then everything had been explained. I could come back home and the lady and her son were caught and also taken to jail. I don't have to explain why this was the worst holiday ever.
He was a dream, the future, or so I thought. But my love was cursed right from the start. Sounds a bit confusing, right? Let me explain. But first, I should probably introduce myself. I'm Carolyn. I was a dreamer. I dreamed of a good, warm, stable, successful life. I wanted a good job. And I wanted to travel around the world a bit with Helen. She was my best friend. We virtually shared the same dreams and hobbies and interests and lifestyles. We've been friends since we were kids. People often thought that we were sisters. I did too, in fact. She even got jealous if anyone tried to get close to me. Every day, Helen and I worked a little more towards our dreams. Once, when Helen and I were traveling with some of our friends, we had a problem with the hostess on the plane. A gentleman intervened and cleverly solved our problems. His name was Danny. I liked him. A lot. I thought about him often, but whenever I talked to Helen about him, she told me that he was not as amazing as I seemed to think he was. Coincidentally, I met him again at a party of a mutual friend. We talked together till daylight. I told Helen about our encounter, and she expressed her wishes that my love story would have a happy ending. I similarly told her that I hoped she would find the love of her life someday too. Everything would be okay, we figured. Then, one day, I received a letter in our mailbox. It was in weird handwriting, as if the writer had written it with a trembling hand. I opened it curiously. It said that my love for Danny would become a curse if I didn't give him up and get him out of my life. What nonsense, I thought. Whose idea of a silly joke was this? I immediately called Danny and Helen to tell them about the letter. Danny laughed, but Helen was worried and suggested that I should be careful from now on. That same day, Danny had a horrible car accident, but fortunately he wasn't hurt. A detective investigating the case determined that his car brakes had been tampered with. In another incident, a car almost hit me, but it swerved away at the last minute. When I mentioned this incident to Danny, he tried to calm me down and told me to just forget about it. He gave me a beautiful bracelet as a present and proposed. We got engaged, and I couldn't have been happier. I wanted to show the bracelet to Helen, but somehow I seemed to have lost it. I couldn't find it anywhere. Anyway, when I told Helen about his proposal, she was thrilled for me. I spent days shopping for just the right wedding dress. I was so busy with preparations that I forgot all about the ominous letter. I went to the wedding hall early to make sure that everything was ready and prepared. Helen was helping me, and Danny kept calling me to make sure I was all right. Suddenly, the lights went out. I called out to Helen, worried that she might have tripped and fallen when the lights were out. When the lights came back on, Helen had fainted, and my dress had disappeared. I screamed to the ceiling, "What do you want from me? Leave me alone!" Suddenly, Danny appeared out of nowhere and asked me what had happened. I told him then and there that we must break off our engagement, otherwise the curse the letter mentioned might injure someone or cause someone to die. Then Helen came to and tried to calm me down. She told me to go to the car and that she would get our stuff and follow me. I loved Danny and wanted to marry him, but now I was seriously worried that this curse threat might actually be real. Helen came back carrying a bag and a large suitcase and told Danny not to worry, that she would drive me home and then call him to tell him that we had arrived safely. I was still crying, and Helen was trying to calm me down. When we arrived home, I noticed something strange. Helen was carrying a bag that was partially open, and I glimpsed a piece of clothing stuffed into it. It looked exactly like my dress. I opened the bag and found that it was my dress. I confronted Helen and demanded to know how my missing dress ended up in her bag. I clearly caught her red-handed, and she was unable to answer coherently. I realized at that moment that the source of the so-called curse was Helen. "Helen," I said, "how dare you do this to me? I thought we were like sisters to each other." She replied icily, with a glare that I saw for the first time. She said that she fell in love with Danny just as I did, but he chose me instead of her, and that she hated me for it. She said she won him over and got him to love her instead. Then they both tried to scare me into calling off the wedding so that she and Danny could be together. There are no words to describe how I felt at the time. I replied in a similar tone. I told her that I don't ever want to see her again, or Danny. Neither of them mattered anymore. I never did see Helen or Danny after that day. I'm on a Caribbean island now, sipping on a cocktail. I read in the paper that Danny and Helen had announced their engagement. I'm thinking about what wedding present I should give them as a surprise.
Tradition and Perdition. This article has an intriguing title, doesn't it? I wonder what strange storyline you were trying to imagine in your mind. Maybe you are right, maybe you are wrong, or maybe the story is totally different from what you are imagining. Let's see how good your imagination is. My name is Samuel, Sam for short. I'm 23 years old, and I'm an electronic engineer. I'm just an average person like the majority of people you meet in daily life. Nothing special. My only goal in life is to fall in love. I dream of having a girlfriend that I can love, protect, support, do my best for, and make happy. She would be my queen, and I would be her knight in shining armor. But I know that love stories rarely reflect real life. I've tried to date a lot of girls so far, but I've failed every time, to the point where I've lost hope. So I decided to just focus on my work until one day, destiny surprised me and brought Maya into my little world. I work in software and social media, and I have a consulting website where people can contact me to help them with computer problems. I was never bothered by customers' personalities. To me, they're just customer numbers and cash cows. Until Maya called me. She had a problem with her laptop and asked for my help fixing it. I don't know why I took my time solving her problem, but then again, I do because I like to hear the sound of her soft voice. Before hanging up, I asked her to call me later socially. I expected her to make an excuse why she couldn't, but after 2 minutes, she promised to call me later. I was thrilled by her response. I waited many days for her call. It never came, and I began to lose hope, when suddenly, she did call me again. We talked for hours. Time simply flew by so quickly. I felt as if I loved her, but how can that be when I've never even met her before? We decided to meet up at a botanical garden. She told me she would wear a purple dress with mottled flowers on it. I told her I would be holding some flowers. I arrived at the garden and skimmed through the crowds looking for her, but couldn't find her. Then suddenly I heard her soft voice behind me say, "Hello." I turned around. Her face was angelic. We sat, ate, chatted, and laughed. When I took her home, she looked at me suddenly and said, "I might love you." No one could imagine my feelings at that moment. I was in seventh heaven. I asked her to marry me at that very moment, but she hesitated. I asked her what was wrong. At my insistence, she told me she had a secret that she couldn't tell me. I asked if she was in love with another guy. She hugged me and said, "Of course not." I thought, why does destiny have to make life so complicated? Regardless, I made up my mind to meet her family, so I visited her father at work, and he invited me to their home. When I got there, I found that they were an elegant Asian family, so polite. They were everything I could have hoped for. Maya spoke in a subdued manner on occasion and was looking around a lot. I thought that maybe that was because she was nervous with me being there to meet her family. We selected a wedding date just 2 weeks from now. Maya seemed sad during this period, and I asked her many times what was wrong, but she never answered me. I even gave her a chance to back out of the wedding in case she had gotten cold feet, but she assured me that she wanted to marry me very much, and she begged me not to abandon her. I was puzzled by her behavior. At our wedding party, I was ecstatic. I invited my family and friends. I was waiting for Maya, and she arrived wearing a veil and escorted by her father. The veil was very dark, and I couldn't see her face at all. I thought perhaps she was very shy or embarrassed on this special day when she was the focus of everyone. After the party, we drove home. I tried to hold her hand, but she pulled her hand away. That's odd, I thought. Once we arrived home, I tried to talk to her and hug her, but she suddenly screamed and started jumping around on the tables and chairs like a monkey. What in the world is going on here, I thought. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Maya's father with someone out of sight behind him. Slowly, the person stepped from behind him. It was Maya. What? I couldn't believe my eyes. I was completely taken aback, nonplussed, confused. I managed to stammer, Who are you?" "I'm Maya," she replied simply. I pointed to my bride monkeying around the room behind me and asked with a puzzled and shocked expression on my face, "Then who is she?" Her father replied in a matter-of-fact tone, "That is Taya, my oldest daughter." I looked at Maya and she shrugged helplessly and explained, "It's our tradition that the oldest daughter has to marry first before the younger one can get married. I tried to tell you, but I couldn't because otherwise no one would marry Taya due to her mental illness." I didn't understand. Many questions were rolling in my mind. You mean, I married Taya instead of you? I had been tricked, betrayed. I felt as if I were in an insane asylum or a nightmare or the butt of some bad joke. Some days after this travesty, when I would find myself walking down the street in a trance, I would frequently break out in hysterical laughter. Passers-by would look at me askance and move away from me as if I were some raving lunatic. Perhaps I was. I had become a laughingstock once news of my story made the rounds. Maya and her father had pulled off their shady scheme flawlessly and suckered me right in. And I fell for it. Lying on a psychiatrist's couch, I asked him, "Doctor, what is the wrong with me?"